Hey everyone, I'm Jake Parker, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about Dark Tide, the Great Boston Molasses Flood of 1919 by Stephen Puleo. So initially it almost sounds a little comical, a giant wave of molasses crushing into a city, but in actuality it did a lot of structural damage, killed 21 people, and injured over 150. The tank itself was 50 feet tall with a 90-foot diameter. It was created by a company or constructed by a company called U.S. Industrial Alcohol. They had a budget of $30,000 to do it, which today translates to about $380,000. The tank had a carrying capacity of 2.3 million gallons, and at the time, the project manager was a man named Arthur P. Gell. And when he was asked by his supervisors or kind of the headquarters about the project, he said that it will be settled within a very few days. That was April 9th, 2015. It wasn't completed until December 29th, 2015. So they were collecting all this molasses and they were producing industrial alcohol, and they were selling it to U.S. weapons manufacturers, as well as to the Canadian, French, and British governments, because this was during World War I, so they were making munitions and ammunition. So I included a map here, and in yellow you can see the molasses tank. And as you can tell, it's in a pretty industrial area, surrounded by a lot of big buildings. But also to the southwest, that's a residential area. It was really highly concentrated with thousands of people. Arthur P. Gell, he was the treasurer of Purity Distilling Company, and this was a subsidy of USIA. And so the project from the get-go was kind of doomed. They had a late start, really slow work, delayed negotiations, a lot of weather issues as well. And USIA was dangling a potential promotion in front of Gell, so this was kind of his time to shine. If he did this project, built the tank, then he was probably going to land this job, this promotion. He had no relevant experience in regard to engineering or construction, anything like that. And when it's all said and done, he cut a lot of protocol. And the tank was supposed to receive, they were supposed to do a final check on it, and they were going to fill the entire tank with water. He skipped this just for the sake of time and money, and he decided to fill the bottom 4 inches with water and said that was good enough. There was a lot of public concern over this as well. There was a man named Isaac Gonzalez, and he was kind of just a worker bee in the company. He wasn't really high up in the totem pole or anything like that. But he worked maintenance on the tank, so he saw it every day. And he also saw it in his dreams because he had nightmares that it was gonna break. He would hear it all often groaning and essentially moving and things like that. So there were he would sleep on location a lot of times just in case he could wake up and warn people if anything was happening. He would dump molasses into the bay to try and lighten the load sometimes, and he notified authorities multiple times. He wasn't the only one concerned about it, and he received a lot of different stories from other workers or people in the area, such as a stableman for the City of Boston Paving Department. He described hearing noises, gurgling, and popping coming from the tank. Other workers heard or felt vibrations from the tank as well, and so Isaac actually visited Gell in his office in Cambridge and told him all these concerns. Gell heard these concerns, told him there's nothing to worry about, the tank is perfectly fine, and all he did was paint the tank a kind of a burgundy brownish color, which really just covered up all of the molasses that was leaking from the tank. So then January 15th, 1919, it finally happened, and this is pretty interesting to note that this headline says that the tank exploded, and this is the kind of the common theme around all other headlines at the time. And USIA took this to the courtroom when this case finally did end up in the courtroom. And at the time, with the First World War going on, there was a lot of anarchists, and they were anti-war, anti-government, and they were blowing up other buildings, anything that had to do with government or war. They would try and throw a stick of dynamite at it or something like that. So USIA claimed that the tank was perfectly fine. Somebody else blew it up. The response and the recovery: 21 people were killed and 150 were injured. It was unfortunate for the people of Boston that one of the first buildings to get taken out by the wave of molasses was the fire department, the fire station, and this ended up being one of the main areas that rescues had to happen because a lot of the firemen got trapped inside of the fire station. But overall, the response it was pretty slow. It was really difficult because it was molasses, and initially when the molasses came out of the tank, it was at a um, kind of warmer consistency, and this was in the middle of January. So after it splashed through the town, it cooled and thickened up, and people were stuck in there. So any responders had to trudge through super thick, sticky molasses to help people. And a lot of times people just drowned because the molasses was so thick they literally couldn't lift their head up. There were accounts of lots of people dying from infection from their injuries afterwards. Some suffered PTSD, and there's even one man who experienced such severe stress that his hair turned white during the ordeal. That was pretty interesting. There were some pretty big changes made after the flood as well, though. The court ruled against USIA. They found there wasn't any evidence that there was kind of any nefarious activities that led to an explosion of the tank, and they just found that it was poor construction and too many corners cut, and they just went too quick with the operation of building it, and so USIA had to pay $628,000 for damages, despite over 21 people being killed, 150 injured, and $1 million in property damage. So I think they got off pretty easy, personally. But some of the big changes that came were pretty good for the whole country. But the Boston Building Department, they made some stricter requirements, and they required that all calculations of engineers and architects be filed with their plans, and that stamped drawings had to be signed. And this became a standard practice on work sites across the country. And also, new engineering certificates were now adopted and required in all states, that all plans for major structures had to be sealed by a registered professional engineer before a municipality or state would issue a building permit to them. And kind of an unexpected change was there was a bigger skepticism in big business, and this came with the court ruling against USIA, and people felt that they couldn't trust these big businesses if they weren't going to police themselves. And this feeling kind of carried through the next couple of decades. So I visited a few other outside sources as well, but I found that in actuality, Puleo told the story pretty accurately of the flood. I feel like there wasn't any bias at all, and kind of the outcome was, it's kind of hard to argue. He pretty much followed the stayed true to the facts of the story. Um, but I did explore some other pretty interesting sources that had some interesting reports on them. And so this first article was put out by the New York Times, and they showed an experiment by Harvard research students, and they explored how temperature differences affected molasses and how it moved because of this, and which helped explain why it was so destructive. The second was actually an article put out by the History Channel, and this one just kind of just touched again on Puleo's description of the whole event, and there was just a few other new details that I learned, such as the recovery. There were a lot more citizens involved that I didn't get from the book, I suppose you could say, but there was over 300 citizens that came to the streets immediately after the flood to help free people and clear debris and molasses. The Boston Globe, that third article, was I found particularly interesting, and a few of the minor details were different. This author said that there was a 25-foot wave, whereas in the book I heard 40-foot. But they also touched on a scientific study by a man named Ferris Jabber, and this he explored the fact that the molasses was considerably more destructive than water would have been, and that's because molasses is a non-Newtonian fluid, meaning that the viscosity and the thickness of the molasses was considerably more dangerous and deadly than water would have been. Water would have rushed around a lot of objects, where molasses broke through the objects instead. And the last article was put out by Boston.com, and found this article pretty much followed exactly the story as well. A few minor details were different. The author here states that the tank had been filled only 4 previous times, while in the Dark Tide book, the author states that it had been fully filled 7 times. So just, again, a few minor details, but overall, the story stayed true to the facts, in my opinion. But I think it's pretty clear and obvious that the flood was caused by just shoddy construction and poor choice and selection of materials used for the tank, weak steel. Again, there were no experts or officials there to inspect the tank, and the people that were overseeing the project failed to listen to the warning signs from the people who actually were on the ground working on the tank. So in my opinion, the Great Boston Molasses Flood was just caused by pure negligence. Thanks for listening. I'm looking forward to your comments. Thank you.